Introducing Martin Fenty and Sahir House World AIDS Day Vigil 2021.
Welcome to this year's World AIDS Day Vigil. This year's event is again sadly virtual due to the ongoing pandemic, but it is important we keep connected, especially in this momentous year. It is 40 years since the first recorded case of HIV being identified, and this year, as with previous years, we meet to reflect, remember and celebrate the lives of those living with HIV and lost to HIV. It is also time to acknowledge the tremendous advances in HIV treatment, especially in this country, which will hopefully lead us to the target of zero transmission of HIV by 2030. This World AIDS Day, we have been asking people to make a pledge to further the message that we can end HIV stigma one conversation at a time. In order to reach the predicted target of zero transmissions by 2030, we need to have conversations about you equals you. Who will you talk to? So 2021 marks my 28th anniversary since I was diagnosed with HIV. So I've lived a long time as a positive person through this pandemic. And those early days were very different to where we are now. There were no effective treatments. What treatments were there were around preventing infections, with the hope that they would keep you alive long enough for something else to come along. Luckily for me, that was the case, and I was around to take up combination therapy, which I've now been on for 24 years. Combination therapy changed my life. It changed my life from one where I was fatigued, had constant infections, to one where I had energy, where I was able to lead an active life of exercise, which I never thought I would do, but also begin living life with a future. And that's why it's important that now in 2021 we think about testing, because testing is really important. Knowing your status is really important, because then you can get on treatment, and on treatment which is more effective than ever. Reducing the transmission of HIV is possible, because by being on treatment, the virus can become undetectable in the body. Once it is undetectable, as a positive person, it is impossible for you to pass it on to other people. Not only that, your health will be maintained. You can lead a full life with a future, something I never imagined could happen at the age of 23. I now, at 51, am facing a life of actually being an old man, of actually having to think about claiming a pension, being an old man with a partner and a career. All things are possible, and that didn't seem like it when I was a young man. And for many who are diagnosed these days, that feeling remains the same, that there isn't a future, that life will end, but that isn't true. With HIV testing and with HIV treatment, nothing needs to change. Life can continue. You can keep yourself safe and healthy and keep other people safe and healthy. Let's get people testing and let's get people on treatment.
40 years of HIV, 4 decades of campaigning, 4 key speakers talking about 4 different aspects of working around HIV. First, we will hear from Dr. Nick Beeching.
So hello, my name is Nick Beeching. I'm an infectious disease specialist working in the Liverpool Infectious Disease Unit, and I also do teaching and research based primarily in the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And I'm delighted to share with you my rather long experiences of working with HIV. My first patient I saw was in 1986 overseas, and then I came to work in Liverpool in 1987, so I'm now in my 35th year here. And when I first arrived, HIV was a really terrible thing. It was this new disease that was exploding um, and causing disease with a very poor prognosis. We had very little treatment and certainly nothing very specific. And in those early days, the infectious disease unit ward resembled a 1960s cancer ward with people requiring recurrent cycles of admission for horrible symptoms and disease problems. Our ward staff would get to know them very well, and then sadly, many of them moved on rapidly. Uh, at that time, all we had was AZT, this new drug, which had lots of side effects and only worked for a few months. Since then, things have changed beyond recognition. One of the early good things, if you like, about HIV was it changed the way we talked with our patients and worked with them and worked with our community colleagues, and since then been progressive development of truly multidisciplinary care in the community and in the hospital and in our clinics. And we've been very pleased to share that journey from the medical point of view with our colleagues in Sahir House that have been around for longer than I have in Liverpool, I think. So it's been a pleasure to work with them. Sadly, many of our patients have moved on, but recently I've been pleased to see patients in clinic who I've known for over 20 years since their diagnosis, and they're doing extremely well. So that's something that's rather wonderful. So the prognosis has changed beyond our wildest expectations, and now the treatment is much easier to take, much less side effects than the older combination therapies. And if taken and the virus is unmeasurable, in other words, well controlled, almost a normal prognosis for life. So there's really good reasons now to know if you're HIV positive. In addition to that, we've known for a long time now that if the virus is well controlled and unmeasurable, a woman can become pregnant without fear of passing virus onto their babies, and we've been very successful about that nationally and in Liverpool. And also for some years, we've presumed that if your virus is unmeasurable, that it also is not transmitted sexually. And now we have several studies in the last couple of years that have confirmed that. So the phrase U equals U, unmeasurable virus, means untransmittable disease, is a nice way of encapsulating that. And it means that the reasons for taking treatment now, as soon as you're diagnosed, means that an individual has a good prognosis for themselves, but they're also performing a public good. They're not going to transmit it to other people. And we hope that early detection and treatment of everybody with HIV will lead to control of infection in the community. So as I reflect back on now into my 35th year and nearing retirement, it's really been a privilege to learn so much from so many of my patients. Many of them have become friends in clinic, share with them some bad times, but now a lot of good times as well. To work with wonderful colleagues in the hospital and Sahir House and other services, support services and information services for people with living with HIV have improved astronomically. And it's just been a wonderful transformation um, over the last 35 years. Sadly, still about 5% in people in the UK don't know that they have infection and therefore are not making the most of available treatment. So we need to go on having those discussions, emphasizing how good it is both for the individual and the general public of having unmeasurable virus, which is untransmittable to other people. So I thank Sahir House for the opportunity to join you in making this very short video, and I wish you all well as I move on into my retirement.
Dr. Nick Beeching has known many of us for a long time as their doctor, colleague and friend. We wish Nick a happy and relaxing retirement and thank you for your contribution today.
End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time.
Hi, End HIV Stigma, one conversation at a time. I'm an outreach support worker and I speak to my clients all the time about you equals you.
End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time. I talk to my friends about It's a Sin. We talk about you equals you to end stigma.
End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time. I talk to my children and relatives about you equal you to end stigma.
End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time. I talk to Sahir house volunteers about you equals you to reduce stigma.
End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time. I talk to my family about HIV and you equals you.
End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time. At Sahir House, we can be very creative about those ongoing conversations about you equals you.
End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time.
Next, we will hear from a community activist, Marjorie Morgan, a writer, award-winning playwright and journalist.
Hello, my name is Marjorie Morgan. I'm a writer and storyteller. I like talking with people and finding out what matters to them. Breaking the stigma around HIV is one of the stories I like to share, so I wanted to briefly talk about how we can end HIV stigma one conversation at a time. I remember I had my first personal conversation with my friend Dwayne a few years ago. This young man chose to tell me his story, his personal experience of getting to know the facts about HIV. He didn't know much about this virus before it impacted his life and sent him into a whirlwind of doubt, fear and worry some years before. But when he was telling me the story, when we were having our conversation, the young person I saw before me was calm, happy and confident. Even more so today, he settled down with his career, his new home, his dog and his fiancée. Our conversation retraced his journey from his first positive HIV test results, from feeling isolated to understanding that knowledge is power and can bring peace and health. Dwayne asked me to write a stage play based on his experiences, to share the conversation with others, and the play Enigma Stigma was born in 2018. And with this vehicle, we've continued to have conversations. I'm now redrafting the stage play Enigma Stigma into a radio play to make it even more accessible and so the conversation can take place wherever there is a phone or electronic device. Dwayne told me how important it is to know your status and that testing is nothing to be afraid of because of the range of effective treatments and because you equals you. Undetectable equals untransmittable. Take for example the current situation relating to the COVID-19 virus. Knowing the data regarding the R rate helps to understand the transmission of the virus. When the R rate is low, less people are exposed to COVID-19. It's the same principle with HIV when the ART PrEP treatment is used. With treatment, the HIV viral load can become so reduced that it becomes undetectable and is therefore untransmittable. You equals you. So with the conversation with Dwayne and other conversations since that time, I have learned that knowledge is power and access to professional help can change the outcome of HIV infections. So I would encourage people to get tested. It's free and easy to do via the NHS, just a spot of blood or a saliva sample. Have conversations and let's get rid of the stigma surrounding HIV. Stigma does not have to be an enigma. Let's talk, because you equals you.
Thank you, Marjorie. We look forward to hearing Enigma Stigma as a radio play.
End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time.
Okay.
We're having a conversation about you equals you.
Which is undetectable equals untransmittable.
End HIV stigma.
One conversation at a time.
Hello. You equals you. You need to come on our HIV awareness training course. We talk about you equals you. End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time.
Hi friends, I'm just catching up on the latest information about you equals you. It's always good to learn something new, and together we can end HIV stigma one conversation at a time.
End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time.
Our third speaker is Neris Pope, Wirral sexual health practitioner, 20 years HIV nursing.
Hello, my name's Neris and I work in sexual health services. So my personal HIV journey started when I was a newly qualified nurse about 20 years ago, and my first job was working in inpatient services. So we had a number of patients on the ward that had been diagnosed as HIV positive, and they were at varying stages of the disease progression. At that time, it was quite heavy to look after that type of patient, because you couldn't guarantee what the prognosis was going to be and how that disease was going to progress, or how fast it was actually going to progress. The treatment's extremely harsh, and I think really everybody kind of knew what the ultimate outcome would be. And we got to know a lot of the patients really quite well, because potentially there were multiple admissions to hospital. So we really got to know our patients on a one-to-one basis. The most difficult thing for me really was the isolation that a lot of the patients felt, and the stigma that associates with this particular diagnosis. There were a few that felt it was easier for themselves and their families to not know that that's what they were actually suffering with, and they would tell their family that they had leukemia rather than admit that to themselves, but also the worry of how their families would react and how their local community would react to their family knowing that somebody had that diagnosis. So fast forward 20 years and the landscape of HIV treatments has changed incredibly. The treatments that we have now are much more effective, and HIV is no longer considered to be a life-limiting condition. Positive patients are supported in community clinics and outpatient services rather than hospital admissions, and the actual hospital admissions is no longer the norm. So the important thing is everyone has a HIV status, whether it's positive, negative, or unknown or untested. Encouraging people to get checked is a major part of what we do in sexual health services, and we get the opportunity to challenge those ideas and stigmas and some of the perceptions that do still exist. So a lot of the common responses that we hear within sexual health in response to being asked if they would like to do a HIV test is, oh, well, I won't have that, or I'd know if I had it, or I'd rather not know. And so I think it's quite clear that a lot of that stigma and that discrimination does still exist. So by encouraging people to get screened and challenging these ideas and attitudes at the time that we see these individuals, hopefully we can make it much more normal and much more acceptable to have a HIV test as part of your routine STI sexual health screening. And really making sure that anyone we see understands that you equals you. So undetectable equals untransmittable. So even if a positive diagnosis is given, with the right treatments, they're not at any risk to anybody else. But we can't get to you without testing. Thank you.
Thank you, Neris. And yes, we will continue to challenge those misconceptions around HIV testing.
End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time.
Hi, my name is Paul Court and I'm a Chief Superintendent with Merseyside Police. We can end HIV stigma one conversation at a time. I'll be publishing a blog seeking to educate police officers and staff across the country.
Hi, I work for Liverpool Drug Interactions. When I started in this role, U=U was included in the training. I am now confident about having conversations about U=U. How about you? End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time.
Hi, I'm John. I'm here at Sahir House today to talk to people about the benefits of physical activity on their well-being. I'm going to take away the U=U message, end HIV stigma, one conversation at a time.
End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time.
Our fourth aspect of hearing about 40 years of HIV is a short film from Danny Kilbride, interviewing Professor John Ashton, a public health official who helped institute the Mersey model of harm reduction in Liverpool in 1986, the first government-funded needle exchange programme in the UK.
The legacy of the Mersey model is an unknown tens of thousands of lives that were saved around the world because of the adoption of harm reduction. The early 80s in Liverpool was a very difficult time. The riots took place in 1981 in Toxteth. The city had been abandoned by the Thatcher administration nationally. Youth unemployment was incredibly high, and at that time, heroin began to hit the streets in large quantity. So we had this heroin problem, disaffected youth without anything to do, and then AIDS turned up. It really didn't begin to impact here in the UK until around 1984, I would say. The entry point here in Liverpool was not so much the sexual side initially. It was the issue of the drugs, because so many young people were injecting heroin, and that was the big fear initially. It was in 84, 85 that Howard Seymour, who was my health promotion officer for the region, and I met Glenn Margot. Glenn was one of the deputy public health directors in San Francisco. He was a gay man who was HIV positive. We invited him over to Liverpool. We thought we needed to get ahead of the game with this new challenge. He spent 2 weeks with us. Well, my God, I mean, you know, Glenn Margot, what a hero. You know, he spent those 2 weeks doing workshops, morning, afternoon and evening, with every constituency we could imagine. And that set us into the right place to get started. Behind me here is the site of the Maryland Center in this building on the corner. This is an iconic building in the history of harm reduction globally. This is where it all began in 1986, where the first large-scale syringe exchange program began.
We followed American policies for so long now, stamping down on drug users, heavy sentences, and ignoring drug users' problems. Now, with the advent of AIDS, we've got to change the way we think about drug users. What AIDS means is that we have to show people less dangerous ways of using drugs.
The philosophy that we developed was to make contact with drug users, to maintain contact with them, and to establish a therapeutic relationship so that as and when they were ready to make changes in their behaviour, they would do it. They weren't being forced to do it. And they weren't being criminalised, as was happening in many other places.
Here, what we're trying to do is keep drug users as healthy as possible until they want to stop using drugs. You cannot force people off drugs. Teaching people how to use drugs is not a demonic, evil thing to do. It's a way of saving lives and keeping people healthy.
We were able to bring together the police, the drug squad of the police, the vice squad, the churches, the bishop, the archbishop, the media, the newspaper editors, and so on. And we were able to establish that coalition.
What AIDS has meant is that we have to do things that appear very, very controversial. And I think, fortunately, with the Merseyside police policy here, that the main reason we're keeping down the spread of the virus is the fact that the police support this type of activity.
It brings back many memories for me, this, because at that time we were so active doing different things in public health, but this one stood out among them as being the one that took off, got traction, got legs very quickly, got political support from across the political spectrum and made a difference, and then got picked up, not just locally and nationally, but globally. That's where the idea of harm reduction came from, of actually engaging with drug users, supporting them, looking after their physical health, you know, because many of them finished up with amputations and septicemia, and obviously the death toll, which continues to rise even today. So this is the origin of what came to be known as harm reduction, and which went around the world because the Liverpool initiative was the first large-scale project. We didn't realise at the time just how significant what we were doing was.
The estimated rate of HIV infection amongst drug injectors in Edinburgh is 70%. In New York, it's 60%. In London, 10%. In Liverpool, it's 0.1%.
We essentially kept the HIV virus out of the injecting drug population.
So what we got is a situation where there's very few people with HIV. Drug users are becoming more healthy. They're in touch with society. They're becoming members again with society. And to me, that offers the best hope for the future.
My role in this was really to act as a catalyst, you know, to drop that speck of dust into a super-saturated solution to produce some kind of crystal, you know, the ferment of that. But so many people played such an important part in this. The success of the Mersey model, of the Maryland Centre of Harm Reduction, its global rollout is a tribute and a legacy for Glenn. Glenn died of AIDS some years later. This was a very brave man, and he found fruitful soil where we were.
This interview is part of a programme of 8 short videos highlighting strategies of community care within the ongoing HIV epidemic from Vigil AIDS, being screened around the world this World AIDS Day. The link to the full programme is on the YouTube description.
Hello, my name is Emma Curden. I'm a health improvement practitioner working for St Helens Sexual Health Service. We can end HIV stigma one conversation at a time. This week, I've delivered a HIV awareness session to a dance group where we spoke about undetectable equals untransmittable, or U equals U for short.
Hello, my name is Di.
And my name is Jen. We work in the HIV clinic at Clatterbridge Hospital in Wirral.
Our role is to look after people who have been diagnosed with HIV and live in Wirral and the surrounding areas.
During our time working in the service, we've seen many changes, including wider drug choices, single tablet regimens, better tolerability, drug resistance testing, and more importantly, people living longer, healthier lives.
HIV is no longer a death sentence. Knowing your HIV status prevents late diagnosis and spreading the virus on. There are many venues in Merseyside where you can get tested.
The U=U campaign has helped to change the public's perception of HIV and to understand that an undetectable viral load means HIV is untransmittable.
We can end HIV stigma.
One conversation at a time.
Now we will hear some messages from the Sahir House peer groups.
This World AIDS Day, we remember and honour the lives sadly lost to AIDS and focus on supporting the people HIV and AIDS are affecting, and it can affect anyone. However, things have never been so good for people living with or at high risk of contracting HIV, with amazing recent advancements in medication. It's also important that you're aware of your HIV status so that we can work towards ending the transmission of HIV in the UK and world. Treatments for HIV have also greatly improved in recent years, with successful treatments now being able to provide U=U, which means that people who have HIV and on medication that works at controlling it are unable to transmit the virus to anyone else and can live to a normal life expectancy. Treatments are always constantly improving to the point where we may have a vaccine in the future. We all have a responsibility to do what we can to help to end the stigma surrounding HIV and sexual health in general. End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time.
LGBT+ and migrant populations are disproportionately affected by HIV. Many acquire HIV after arrival in the UK, and migrants living with HIV are more likely to be diagnosed late. They are also more likely to be marginalised by the UK's hostile environment policy, which forces many into destitution, stopping them from accessing the healthcare they need. Asylum seekers are also more likely to become ill while being detained in immigration removal centres, with the transgender population being particularly vulnerable and less likely to access sexual health services. As the facilitator of Many Hands One Heart group, I pledge to have more conversations and continue to challenge unfair policies that impact people living with HIV. We continue to defend and advocate for the rights of LGBT+ asylum seekers by making marginalised groups aware of HIV treatment, promoting HIV testing and vital information and awareness around sexual health and contraception to the head to reach members of our society.
Our final words are from Kate, HIV activist, HIV campaigner and Sahir House supporter, and this will be followed by the remembrance list, which is only available on this live stream. If you're watching this vigil afterwards, the remembrance list will not be available. So thank you for joining us this year, and we'll see you at next year's World AIDS Day Vigil.
End HIV stigma, one conversation at a time. Just how many conversations will it take to end the stigma? Are there enough words in the world? And will you hear them? Will you be listening? Should I say them softly or shout them through a megaphone? Should I sign them to you across the gulf between us, or sing them like a lullaby into the wind in the hope that you will hear me? I've had these conversations so many times that I've run out of words and into silence. I find I have nothing left to say. All I can offer now are my eyes. Look, let them speak to you. Look, see me, see you reflected. See, U=U.